Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. A contributing editor for Vanity Fair magazine, Sebastian Junger is the best-selling author of The Perfect Storm, A Death in Belmont, and Fire. Between June 2007 and June 2008, Mr. Junger embedded with the 173rd Airborne Brigade Combat Team, making 5 trips to the Korengal, am I pronouncing that correctly?
That's right.
Korengal Valley of eastern Afghanistan, a location that saw more combat than any other in the Afghan theater. Mr. Junger describes what he experienced in his most recent book, War. By the time you decided to make 5 trips to Afghanistan, intentionally seeking danger, you were a successful author and a married man. What were you doing?
I've been reporting on wars since Bosnia in the early 90s, and it really is just how I see myself. The author gig came a little later. It worked out better than I could have anticipated, but it never changed my sense of myself as being a reporter and who goes to foreign countries and often reports on conflict.
All right. Segment 1. You divide war into 3 subsections or 3 books, the first of which is Fear. You quote Captain Dan Carney, commander of Battle Company, quote, this is Dan Carney in your book, "I was blown away by the insurgents' ability to continue fighting despite everything America had to throw at them. It was a different enemy than I fought in Iraq, and the terrain offered some kind of advantage I'd never seen or read or heard about in my entire life," close quote. Young Americans in the Korengal Valley, who was the enemy, and what was distinctive about that terrain?
It was very mountainous. The valley started around 5,000 feet, and it was extremely rugged. There was a lot of rocks, a lot of vegetation, a lot of places to hide. There was something called micro-terrain. It's the military's term for little holes and hiding places in the rocks where you can survive artillery or even 500-pound bombs dropped by planes. So they could completely hammer a Taliban position, and then they would, the smoke would clear, and the Taliban would pop up and start shooting again. The Taliban were a mix. Starting at the bottom, there were local guys who were paid $5 to, shoot off a magazine of AK at the Americans and sort of run away. There were those guys, not particularly ideological. It's a poor place, and they needed some money. Sort of going on up the chain, there was a lot of timber cutting in there, and there was a kind of a local timber mafia, and they would cut these huge trees on the upper ridges and export them to Pakistan illegally. Those guys had a kind of vested criminal interest in keeping government authority out of the Korengal Valley. Not ideological, but they saw a sort of common a common goal with the more ideological fighters that came in from Pakistan. There were Pakistanis trained in the training camps in Pakistan. There were foreigners from Saudi Arabia, from Chechnya. Those were really, really hardcore guys. They really knew what they were doing, and they were utterly ideological and probably not people you could really negotiate with.
So you got 3 levels of harassment from ordinary villagers, if that's the term, who live in the area, the local black market syndicate, and then people who were really part of the international war on terror.
Yeah.
Okay. Fear, your topic here in this first book. Quote, "Combat jammed so much adrenaline through your system that fear was rarely an issue. Far more indicative of real courage was how you felt before the big operations. My personal weakness wasn't so much fear as the anticipation of it." Explain that.
One guy said to me, the scariest stuff that happened up there were the things that didn't happen, the attacks we were expecting that didn't happen. Once an attack started, fear really was not a problem. I mean, you were kind of functional, but your mind went kind of blank. At least mine did. The guys were very well trained. They jumped on their weapons and they did what they were trained to do. And fear really was not an issue, but the dread.
They jumped on their weapons. You picked up a pen. You
No.
were one of these guys. The book makes clear you lived as they lived with them,
Yeah.
with the one unvarying distinction that you never picked up a weapon.
I had a video camera, and I was shooting a documentary in addition to writing this book. And in combat and outside of combat, my job was to shoot video. And the one time that I got caught we got hit pretty hard at this outpost, and I didn't have my camera. I couldn't get to it. There was too much gunfire between me and it. And that was the one time where I really sort of panicked in combat. Otherwise, I had a job to do, and that job kept me from experiencing fear. The dread beforehand, before an expected attack or before an American operation into a dangerous area, that dread was really sometimes kind of unbearable. But it's a sort of different experience from straight fear. I was blown up by an IED. I was in a Humvee that got blown up, and we were stuck in there for a few minutes taking fire. The Humvee was on fire. I had zero fear. I don't think my heart rate even went up. All the fear of that situation happened later in the evening.
Again, another quotation here. The more literal forms of strength, like carrying 160 pounds up a mountain, depend on the size of your muscles, but muscles only do what you tell them, so it still keeps coming back to the human spirit. Close quote. Is that a clue to your motivation and to the theme of this book, that you're drawn to reporting on combat because the human spirit is on most vivid display when the human body is in constant danger? Is that what's going on here?
I mean, that might be kind of a fancy way to put it. I mean, in combat, I think you see the essence of who we are as human beings, the good and the bad. It's all on very sort of vivid display. There was a guy in the platoon who, we were on a very long patrol, a 24-hour movement. Everyone was exhausted, and one guy started falling out, which is what soldiers call sort of like failing physically. And we were in a very bad place.
Falling out, what he starts to stumble? Or
yeah. Okay. Slow everyone down. And this one guy in the platoon, a guy I was pretty close to, said, you can't be tired. You don't have the right to be tired. And I say in my book, combat is the only situation where you don't have the right to experience something as human as exhaustion. And the reason is that what happens to you happens to everyone. If you slow down, everyone has to slow down. If you don't drink enough water on patrol and you dehydrate and you become a heat casualty, everyone is stuck with you. And so it makes the individual completely accountable to the group. It's not a matter of discipline from above. It's lateral discipline from your brothers in the platoon. And it's one of the things, being part of a platoon like that and accountable to everyone and with a very clear sense of your job out there, I think is one of the things that men really miss about combat when they come home. It's not so much the adrenaline, it's having that very secure place in a unit where what's expected of you is very, very clear.